Ever feel like those classic motivation tactics, are more hype than help?
I know what you mean.
Like dangling a carrot on a stick just makes people feel, well, it's a bit demeaning, isn't it? Like they're donkeys or something.
Yeah, can feel that way. Bit simplistic.
Definitely. And you're not alone. Today, we're ditching the cliches and taking a deep dive into the science of what truly motivates us. Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew because we're uncovering why those typical rewards often backfire, and we're exploring the surprising factors that really fuel that fire within.
Should be interesting.
And lucky for us, we have expert speaker here to guide us through it all.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I think it's fascinating how often we approach motivation from the wrong angle. You see, we fall back on these outdated methods, even when the research points us in a completely different direction. It's about understanding the human needs at the heart of it all.
Right, and let's unpack this with a story from one of our sources about Billy Beane, the Oakland A's baseball manager, the one who inspired the movie Moneyball. The Boston Red Sox once offered Beane a record-breaking salary, perks galore, the works, but he turned them down flat.
It's interesting, isn't it? What's really interesting about Bean isn't that he lacked ambition, but his core values, his love for the game itself and prioritizing his family. Well, those things outweigh those shiny external motivators.
Yeah, it makes you think.
It highlights a fundamental truth about motivation. Everyone is motivated, just not always by what we assume.
So it's not about a lack of motivation, but about tapping into the right kind of motivation.
Exactly.
And that leads us to the spectrum of motivation concept, which ranges from what experts call suboptimal to optimal. And it seems like those traditional rewards, the bonuses, the employee of the month plaques, they land squarely in the suboptimal zone.
They do. When we rely on external motivators like that, like money or prizes, it's like we're trying to control behavior rather than cultivate it. This might work temporarily, but often leads to burnout, resentment, even stifles creativity.
It makes sense. And it's funny, one of our sources, Dr. Brandon Irwin, actually found that silent coaches surprisingly produced better results than those who were constantly verbally pushing their athletes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, what's so fascinating about that is how counterintuitive it seems. You'd think the more encouragement, the better, right?
Yeah.
But what's actually happening?
Well, what often happens is that constant external praise, it can actually make people feel pressured, even controlled, and it chips away at their sense of autonomy, which is crucial for lasting motivation.
It's like instead of that constant, you got this, one more rep, a silent coach might simply be fully present, attentive, but allowing the athlete to tap into their own internal drive.
Precisely. It all comes back to empowering people, not controlling them. And, this principle doesn't just apply to sports. Think about the workplace or even our personal lives.
Oh, absolutely. And this reminds me of a time I was giving a presentation to a room full of executives, and I almost lost them completely.
Oh, no. Why? What happened?
Well, it wasn't because the content was boring. It was because everyone was glued to their phones. I mean, these were top-level leaders, and still, that need for connection was palpable. It really drove home how essential it is for us as humans to feel seen and heard.
That's a fantastic illustration of how this need for connection, it transcends professional boundaries. It's a core psychological need, just as important as our physiological needs, like food and water.
It's true. We don't often think about it like that.
We are social creatures, wired for connection. It impacts our well-being, our motivation, everything.
And that leads perfectly to the third element we'll be diving into today. Competence. We all crave that feeling of mastery, of being good at something. One of our sources shared a story about a mother named Elena who realized her son had such a narrow definition of learning that he couldn't see its value outside of a school setting.
That's incredibly common, actually. And it highlights the importance of fostering a growth mindset, that belief that our abilities are not fixed but can be developed through dedication and hard work.
It's like we get so caught up in the idea of being smart that we forget about the importance of effort and perseverance.
It's so true. And this has big implications, especially when it comes to how we approach things like goal setting.
Yes, it often feels very much about checking those boxes, hitting those targets. But what if we reframed it? What if we focused on growth and mastery instead?
Now, that's a powerful shift. When our goals are aligned with our personal values and a sense of purpose, they become infinitely more motivating.
And that takes us straight into the realities of the modern workplace, especially in the wake of the pandemic, which really shook things up.
Absolutely it did. The Great Resignation made it abundantly clear People are no longer willing to tolerate workplaces that don't meet their needs. They want flexibility, they want to feel heard, and they want a sense of purpose in their work.
They want to feel valued. So, how can leaders effectively cultivate these things?
It starts with understanding those fundamental psychological needs we've been discussing: choice, connection, competence. Leaders who prioritize these things create the foundation for a truly motivating and fulfilling work environment. It's a paradigm shift, really. Instead of asking, how do we get people to do what we want? We need to ask, how do we create an environment where, well, where people are inspired to bring their best selves to work?
It's about shifting from that transactional mindset to a more transformational one, right? And speaking of transformations, one of the sources we dug into for this deep dive actually challenges some long-held beliefs about motivation, particularly in the business world. Take the old adage, it's not personal, it's just business.
Right. The classic attempt to separate emotions from the equation.
Yeah. But the reality is business is personal.
It is.
Every decision we make, every action we take, it impacts real people. Employees, customers, the community. It's about recognizing the human impact of our work.
Hmm.
And yet, so often, we try to compartmentalize, to operate from a place of detachment. Which brings me to another prevalent belief we need to unpack a bit. The idea that leadership is about wielding power.
The old command and control model. Yeah, that's definitely outdated.
Hmm.
True leadership, it's not about wielding power over others, but about empowering those around you. It's about fostering collaboration, encouraging growth, and creating a culture where everyone feels valued, respected, heard.
And it seems like so many traditional leadership practices, they actually undermine the very things we've been discussing. You know, that choice, connection, competence, like applying constant pressure to perform or using rewards as a way to manipulate behavior.
Absolutely, and let's not forget micromanaging, the ultimate dream killer.
Oh, for sure.
These tactics, they create a culture of fear and anxiety, which stifles creativity, innovation, and that intrinsic motivation we're striving for.
It's like we're so busy trying to control every little thing that we forget to create the space for people to actually thrive.
It happens all the time.
So what's the alternative? How do we shift from that driving energy to a more supportive approach?
It starts with trust. Instead of saying, you need to do this, we ask, how can I support you in achieving this goal? It's about creating a partnership, not a dictatorship.
That's such an important distinction. And, you know, this makes me think about the importance of self-regulation, not just for ourselves as individuals, but for the teams and organizations we're a part of.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle. When people feel safe, trusted, supported, they are far more likely and equipped to manage their own emotions, their thought patterns, even their behaviors. They become more resilient in the face of challenges, which is essential for any high-performing team.
Absolutely. And one of our sources, they break down self-regulation into three core elements: mindfulness, values, and purpose. They call them the MVPs of motivation, which I love.
It's catchy, right?
It is. So mindfulness, that helps us stay present, aware of our thoughts and feelings without judgment. It allows us to make conscious choices rather than simply reacting based on old habits or ingrained patterns.
Exactly, like hitting the pause button before we hit the send button on that heated email, right?
Exactly. And then values, as we touched upon earlier, those provide a compass for our actions. They help us stay aligned with what's truly important, guiding our decision making and ensuring our behaviors are congruent with our core beliefs.
Right, they ground us.
They do. And then there's purpose. That's all about finding that deeper meaning in our work, you know, connecting to something bigger than ourselves. It's what fuels our passion and commitment, even when things get tough.
It's a powerful motivator.
It is. So how can leaders cultivate these MVPs, the mindfulness, values, and purpose within their teams? It can't just be about casual Friday and team building exercises, right?
Definitely not. It's about fostering a culture of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, even making mistakes, without fear of judgment or reprisal.
It's about creating a space where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness.
Precisely. It's about encouraging people to reflect on their own values and purpose, and then finding ways to connect their work to those deeper motivations.
So instead of just assigning tasks, a leader operating from this framework might ask, how does this project align with your values? Or what's the bigger purpose we're serving through this work?
Exactly. It's about helping people see the meaning and significance in what they do, tapping into that intrinsic motivation that fuels true fulfillment and long-term success. It's so much more effective and sustainable than simply dangling carrots and wielding sticks.
This all makes so much sense. It's like we're finally moving away from these outdated, often detrimental models of motivation and stepping into a new era of leadership, one that's more human-centered, more purpose-driven.
I agree. And the exciting thing is that this isn't just some nice-to-have ideal. When people feel valued, when their work has meaning, and when they feel empowered to make choices and contribute their unique talents, that's when innovation flourishes. That's when we see true engagement, and ultimately that's how organizations thrive.
It's like we've uncovered this whole new dimension of leadership, one that's less about hierarchy and control and more about cultivating a space where people can genuinely thrive.
It really is a shift in perspective, isn't it?
Hmm.
Moving beyond those simplistic carrot and stick models and really delving into the psychology of what truly motivates us as human beings.
Yeah, and we've explored some really practical ways that leaders and really anyone who wants to cultivate a more motivating and fulfilling environment can put these principles into practice.
We have covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the spectrum of motivation to the power of choice, connection, competence.
We talked about the importance of psychological safety, the power of purpose, and how fostering self-regulation in ourselves and others can be truly transformative.
And we've challenged some of those deeply ingrained beliefs about work and leadership that, well, they often hold us back from creating truly exceptional workplaces.
It's been quite a journey. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to you, the listener.
Because it's one thing to grasp these concepts intellectually, right? But the real magic happens when we put them into action.
Exactly. So I'm curious, what's one small change you can make this week to bring even just a sliver of this into your own life?
That's a great question. Maybe it's initiating what we call a motivational outlook conversation with a colleague or even a loved one.
Now, I have to admit, when I first heard that term, I wasn't quite sure what it meant.
It sounds a little formal, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
But it's actually much simpler than it sounds.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's about approaching the conversation from a place of genuine curiosity, asking questions like, what are you really excited about these days? Or what feels particularly draining right now? And what, if anything, could we do to shift that?
It's about creating that space for open and honest dialogue around what's working and what's not, and then brainstorming ways to create a more motivating and fulfilling experience for everyone involved.
Exactly. Or maybe this week, your small change is about setting a personal or professional goal that's deeply aligned with your values and purpose. Something that truly lights your fire.
Oh, I love that. It's a reminder that we don't have to wait for permission or external validation to pursue what matters to us.
Absolutely. And sometimes the simplest shift can be the most profound, like paying closer attention to the language we use, both with ourselves and others.
That negative self-talk can be so insidious, can't it?
It can.
And on the flip side, even small words of encouragement, a genuine expression of appreciation, those things can completely change someone's day.
It's about bringing more mindfulness to our interactions, recognizing the impact, both big and small, that our words and actions have on those around us.
This whole deep dive has been such a great reminder that even the smallest shifts can create a ripple effect.
And as we've explored today, motivation is incredibly contagious. When we create a more motivating and fulfilling experience for ourselves, it naturally extends outwards to those around us.
So let's spark a motivation revolution, one conversation, one mindful choice, one act of encouragement at a time.
It's time to ditch those outdated tactics and embrace a more human-centered approach to work, to life, to everything.
It's time to unlock our full potential, both individually and collectively.
And create a world where everyone feels empowered to thrive.
This has been an incredible deep dive, insightful, thought-provoking, and hopefully inspiring for all of us.
It's been a pleasure sharing this journey with you.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, as always, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the science of motivation. Keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep those conversations going.